There we go. Welcome everyone to our February meeting with Agile Hartford. So as you all know, we are an affiliated group of Scrum Alliance, Agile Leadership Network, and a designated safe meetup group. How to find us: visit our website, agilehartford.org, reach us at Gmail, on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. We have our YouTube channel where we post our recordings from our previous sessions. So if you ever need a refresher or you want to go back and record some PDUs or SEUs for your certifications, all the information is out there for you. Just go to the website, check out the YouTube channel. It's all there for you as a community member. And we also have a small group on Slack. If you'd like to join, talk to any of the board members, we can get you hooked up. If you want to talk about guitars and beer and missing board members, like we did tonight. So more later, but I digress. So here's our board: myself, Steve Nunziata in the upper left, Larry Bach, Janet Custer, Vince Sukraj, who is off drinking this evening, Chris Rudnicki, and Dave Piersnowski. Okay. After tonight's session with Tommy, you'll get a brief survey about the event. So please take a moment, fill it out, give us some feedback on how we did, and tell us what you'd like to see going forward. This is your community. We are here to serve, and we are definitely open to your thoughts and ideas and how we can keep our group moving forward and engaged and meet your needs from an Agile perspective. Sponsoring tonight's event, as always, as has been our partner from day one through the pandemic and before the pandemic, is Eliason Group. So I'm going to briefly turn you over to Dennis, to you or Rich. Who's doing the honors tonight?
Go ahead.
I'll handle it. Dennis, though, feel free though. Good to see you. Thanks, Steve. Happy to be here, and as always, partnered with Agile Hartford. So thanks so much. Thanks to Steve and the rest of the gang. Eliason Group, been a proud partner for Agile Hartford. What, going on 7 years?
On
right?
7
Coming
years.
up.
Yep.
So excited about that, and you guys are doing great things in the community here. And welcome, Tom or Thomas?
Or Tommy.
Tommy, gotcha. Welcome,
Yeah,
Tommy,
Tommy.
To the gang. Notice the guitar on the wall too. I'm not in my guitar room, but appreciate the guitars hanging on the wall for sure. But Eliason Group, we're a consulting partner, expertise with helping our clients through their Agile journey. So training, coaching, workshops, team members as well. So if you are organization who might be looking for some of those services, happy to talk to you. If you're a coach or Scrum Master or just an Agilist in general, would love to talk to you. If you are looking for an opportunity, perhaps there's something we can do to help as well. So, but nice meeting everybody, and welcome Tommy to the gang. Thanks, Steve.
And Rich is also another solid guitar player, and I should know because I jammed with him. So
Yes.
There you go. Thanks, Rich.
Thanks, Steve.
So what's up next? So our next meeting for March, we have James Shore coming in to talk about FAST, which is a new Agile scaling technique. You can sign up for that event beginning at 6:30 p.m. this evening. Actually, now you can go out to Eventbrite and sign up. You'll also get a link when you get the survey email later this evening. So that is open for registration now. More information about the new scaling or the FAST technique is out there on Eventbrite. So please feel free to join us. As always, it's free, it's virtual. We hope to see you then. April 11th, so we had a day change with Chris Sims in the Agile Portfolio game. He's joining us a week earlier on Tuesday the 11th. Wednesday, May 17th, we have an in-person event with Damon Poole. Choice is a Ninja. More to come on that. More to come also as far as where that will be. We are working on a couple of opportunities for in-person. And Wednesday, June 7th with Radhika Dutt, product diseases that kill Agile transformations and how to avoid them. And Radhika had given that presentation at Agile New England recently, and it went over really well, really good presentation. And now to introduce Tommy, I'm going to turn you over to my fellow board member, Larry Bach. Larry?
Thanks, Steve. And so I'm going to deviate a little bit from the script that you see here. So when we went looking for somebody who could make an impact for our group as a speaker, I went scouring around, and I happened to, since I'm in the Texas area, I started with the Agile Austin group, and they had a conference recently back in November, Keep Austin Agile, and Tommy was there, and I listened to his presentation, and it blew me away. Mainly because, all of us talk about working at companies that are remote. Of course, a lot of our employers now say, well, it's time to come back, either hybrid or fully. But Tommy's company has mastered how to do it fully remote. Hopefully, at the end of the presentation, you'll be able to see what a way that has worked at his company. And hopefully you won't be beating down the doors to go work at his company, because we have Elias in here that would like to work with you too. Anyway, before I get too deep in it, I'm just going to turn it over to Tommy. I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say. Tommy, I'm turning it over to you right now.
Perfect. All right, let me share my screen. All right, hopefully everyone can see my first slide.
Yeah, you're good, Tommy.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for having me. That Austin event was great. It was, last year I got to go do a lot more in-person stuff, and it was so great to be back in places I had not been to Austin yet. The night before I found a blues jam and went and jammed down there at the King Bee. It was a lot of fun. But let's talk about building high functioning distributed agile teams. So real quick, first, just a little bit more about me. Tommy Norman, I'm here in Nashville, Tennessee. I've been doing this for now over 30 years. I run the Agile group here, Agile Nashville. I also run a conference here. We didn't run last year, but hopefully we'll be back this year. Music City Agile. It's part of something called Music City Tech, which is 3 conferences in one: Music City Agile, Music City Code, Music City Data. We run that in the fall. I also have, if you're on O'Reilly Learning Online, which used to be Safari Books Online or Inform IT, any of those platforms, I have a ton of content on there, probably like 20 something hours worth of, Scrum fundamentals, Scrum advanced, product ownership, some lean fundamentals. I just did a big metrics one and an update to my Scrum one that'll be coming out soon, and some more. So lots of content out there. If you're already on there, that stuff's free if you're already a member. As I said, been doing this for a while. I went to school to be a pilot and found out I was not a great one. And so it was a good thing I didn't continue doing that. And I kind of fell back into doing computer work, and I started, I was a cable monkey and a desktop support for a government organization for a long time. I got into training, doing technical training, moved over into the development space. That really became, where I found my joy. Started becoming a lead, started becoming, doing multiple roles. I was project manager, I was BA, I was architect, I was all these different things. Nashville, was slow on the Agile uptake, but I luckily got in there pretty early on it. My first gig where we did it, I thought it was stupid because we didn't do it very well. And it felt like the inmates running the asylum, but it was mainly because of our implementation. And then 2 gigs later, I went to some place that was doing it very, very well, just organically. Like they didn't even use all the terms. They didn't even know what they were. They were just a company that thought that way. And that's where I really fell in love with it. I did a presentation on how well we did it there. And then people started coming and asking me, can you come and do that for us? Like I was still a developer. I wasn't a coach or anything like that. And so I was like, okay. And then I started doing that more and more and more. And now that's just became what I did. And so I've, worked at consulting companies, big ones like CGI, CompuWare. I've worked at product companies, LeanKit, Omnicell, and everywhere in between. And the last place I worked was Ackland Avenue, where we did custom software development as a service, and we're completely remote. And a lot of this comes from the last 10 years, because LeanKit was the same way. LeanKit had every imaginable type of team. We had all in person, we had hybrid, and we had completely remote. So this is all of that, the last 10 years of working in these different ways come to bear here. So I first have to admit that I don't particularly like being distributed. I don't like not being around people. I'm a social animal. I like to be with my people. I don't necessarily like remote teams, but I have been working in remote teams forever. I like to have people around me. I am a big firm believer that, the closeness, the tactileness of working, actually being on a board and those things. But, we now live in a world where we're not always together for various different reasons we'll talk about a little bit later on. So I will admit that I begrudgingly became a remote worker, especially when I came to Ackland, which was born remote, had never been anything else, and was remote first. All my teams were in Latin America, mostly in Honduras, but they were now at the end of my tenure there, were 12 different countries. Some team members I had never physically met. Some clients I had never physically met. We had been completely remote from soup to nuts. And there was obviously some really great things that we got to do with that, and some things that weren't so great with that. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So I've also worked with, like I said, 100% remote at Ackland, 100% co-located, part-time remote where we sometimes came into the office, sometimes didn't, the hybrids of all of those. Of all of that experience, one thing I wanted to come to with this presentation is I don't want to talk about tactics. I'm not going to say, hey, you should have your camera on. Hey, you should buy a really good headset. I don't want to talk about that. This is more about remote culture as a company. Because you could do all those tactics, but if you haven't really decided what your remote, culture is as a company and aligned it, it doesn't matter. It's still always going to be kind of the second class citizen. So, we have to remember that the reason we are adopting anything as a company
Sorry, baby.
that's all right, sweetheart. Is that in the end, it has to serve us as a company. We're in the business of making money. We're in the business of something, whatever it is. And we do have to understand how it aligns to that. A lot of times we've talked about, how it makes people happy and things like that. But why do we make people happy? Because people who are happy usually make better things and do it well and stay with us and things like that. I've seen too many times the argument comes from the ground up, and all the argument is made is kind of ignoring the fact that, hey, we still at the end of the day have to be profitable as a company. Unless you work for a nonprofit, and even with nonprofit, you still have to, be, hopefully, using the money wisely. So let's be clear about why would I be remote? Why would I actually do it? So one is cost savings. I don't have to have a big office. And I don't have to bring everybody in. I don't have to buy all this office furniture or space or whatever. So there's just a savings in the overhead of having either a physical location or a large physical location to house everyone. There's the ability to find the best talent. I want the best developers anywhere, and I don't care where you are. You're in, nowhere, Idaho. Okay. I would like you to work on my team. Employee retention. That's a big one now. A lot of people who say, hey, if you don't have a remote one, I'm now used to working remote. I don't want to work here unless you have a remote option. And then increase productivity. Now, I want to put a little pin in that one, and we're going to come back to it, because what we say is productivity, versus the individual versus the whole. So then we have to think about, all right, if those are the reasons that people are going remote, how does that work with an Agile team, especially? Work with any team, but specifically with Agile, because we've been told from the day, we had the manifesto, individual and interactions over process and tools, and the most efficient way to communicate is face-to-face conversation. We have always been a big proponent of putting everybody in the room. And suddenly, as of 2 years ago, nobody could be in the same room. And now we're kind of struggling with, I think we were talking about before, a lot of companies went remote because they had to, and now they're just looking for an excuse to go back. There's a lot of lip service to, there's so many people are telling me, like, they said we'd never go back. All right, we're only going to go back for one day, no more than 2 days, max 3 days, but probably no more than 4 or 5 days a week will we be in the office. Slowly creeping it back in there. So how do we match these two together? So first of all, we have to be realistic in that agile teams are supposed to be highly collaborative. Not all of them are, but that's one of the tenets of it, is that we are talking all the time. There's lots of conversation going back and forth. We're not relying on tools to tell us when things are done or things like that. It's something that we are trying to do more conversationally. And when you talk about communication, the richness of a communication channel, I don't know if you've seen this one before, but there's many other studies about this, about, of course, face-to-face with a whiteboard or someplace where we're drawing or using something to kind of, illustrate what we're talking about, is the best way to convey an idea and communicate something. And what's the worst way? Paper, email, something like that. And so how do we still stay collaborative? How do we, still have the richness of those things? Well, one thing is you have to know that you're just not. Like, it's not going to be the same, and that's okay. We hear this thing about being productive, and people say, I am more productive working from home. Absolutely true in a lot of cases. I'm not driving as much as I am anymore. I have more time to spend on things, these, such others. But we have to say is that does not always equal that our teams are delivering more value remotely. It may, but it may not. So there are times when, as a company, we did this because I had to, and now I'm doing it because people say, if I don't do it, they'll leave. And the problem with that is now I'm kind of doing that out of fear. So one thing is we just need both sides to remember. Like I see it, especially like from the developer and engineering community, who are so, when they say, let us go home, and they would always talk about how they're more productive. Okay, but you can't tell me that when I separate everybody out and we're working over Slack and we're working over Zoom like we are now, that the communication and the collaboration is anywhere near as rich as when we're in the same room. If you've ever been, like when I was at LeanKit, we would, operate in these different models, but then every 6 weeks we would do a hackathon for 3 days, and we'd bring everybody in the same spot and throw them all in a room and feed them, soda pop and pizza, and just some amazing stuff would happen. And we'd always come out of that and go, why can't we work like that all the time? That was a lot of fun. Why can't work be like that all the time? Because of how rich it was, and how being and putting, all the stuff around us, like writing things up on the whiteboards and sticky notes and stuff like that. And just, seeing everybody, hanging out with everybody, the richness of that cannot be replicated. We can get close, but it cannot be replicated. And we just need to admit that it's okay that it's not, because what I'm doing is an exchange, is those 4 things that we talked about. I am giving up some of that richness, hopefully to get back something, more with these other reasons that we talked about. So, one would be the cost savings. By not having to have a big office, maybe I can spend that money elsewhere. And, if I can get the best talent, maybe if my team has the best talent, then what they are not getting in that richness of communication, it doesn't matter because the talent is so high. I'm just getting better work from them. So when we talk about this, there is a trade-off I'm making. So when I was at Ackland, one of the reasons we were using remote talent was that my CTO moved to Honduras. He fell in love with a woman and moved down there and had kids and moved to Honduras. And that's where he started finding all these great technical people down there. And there just happened to be an economic advantage to that. Third world country, I could pay them a fraction of what I would pay the same developer here, but would be a great salary for them. And it added, an economic viability to us to keep teams together. It's why we could have teams that were always together and move together, because they could be on the bench together. That was the economic advantage. There were times when I'd watch that team argue in Slack for an hour and go, if we had just been in the same room, this would have been a 5-minute discussion. But that 1 hour worth of time cost me a lot less than it would have taken if I had hired all those same people in America and done it here. I just have to know that I've done that trade-off. The problem I see right now, and we kind of touched on it earlier, is that the big focus right now is employee retention and attracting talent, because everybody got so used to working remote that now they don't want to go back. And so you almost are forced as a company to offer something like that, especially if you're knowledge-based work, especially if you're in the software industry. You're just losing people. People won't even consider it if it's it. The problem with that is that now we're acting out of fear. Our remote strategy is based on fear. If I don't have a remote offering, I can't attract talent. If I don't have a remote offering, people are going to leave me. And anytime you make a decision based on fear, probably not a great decision. It's also why you see kind of, a lot of these that are not implemented as fully as they could be or embraced as fully as they could be. You result in a lot of half-assed remote cultures where they say remote, but they act, like everybody's going to be there. And that's where you see where there's any excuse. It's almost like they're waiting for the gotcha, the aha to say, ooh, see, that didn't work. Everybody come back in. And that's not a remote culture. It's only there because they're waiting for an excuse to not do it anymore. And so it's not going to be a fully remote culture. And so you do have to kind of embrace that. It is something, if you're truly going to do that, you can't do this out of fear. You have to recognize what I'm giving up for it and what I'm getting because I am adopting it, why I'm adopting it. So how do you create a good remote work strategy in these cases? Well, the first thing is that you have to make it, your strategy for remote have to be part of your company strategy. It can't just be something that you do as, again, to, make some people happy because you're afraid to leave. It has to be built into what your strategy is, the company. When I was at Linkit, their strategy was, I want the best people no matter where they are. I want the best, Agile coaches. I want the best developers, and I don't care where they are. And so that was part of our strategy as a company. And so that meant if I was going to hire people anywhere, that I would have to embrace the remoteness of that. So that was built into it. As I said at Ackland was, we have this unique offering in Honduras where I can find this collection of very, very smart individuals who economically I can pay a little bit less, but still be paying them a very fair wage for their country and be able to keep those teams together. And it worked really well for us. I could keep whole teams together. And we know that those teams were more consistent. They'd already gone through forming, storming, norming, and reached performing, and could easily be performing with each client they went to. But that was part of our company strategy. It was built into it. So, when you do that, you have to make it a first-class citizen. It is not something I'm doing just because of the pandemic. It's not something I'm doing just out of fear. It is something that I'm doing because I believe it makes my company better. It gives us some type of advantage for what we're trying to do as a vision. And so if we say something about remote, we also think about remote. We're not looking for an excuse. There's been plenty of times where when I worked at Ackland, we had bad actors, people that I knew were not pulling their weight. That's the big fears. How do I know? How do I know you're doing your job? I can't see you. When I worked at Linkit, I went to work for a part of the company that my boss was in Seattle, and one of my other workers was in somewhere in the UK. And then two people were actually in Nashville, but they didn't come in the office very much. And I was constantly coming to the office. I'm like, why am I coming to the office all the time? So I stopped coming to the office. Well, my boss's boss sat next to me. And when they stopped seeing me come in every day, they told my boss to tell me to come in every day. And my boss calls me from Seattle and goes, I'm about to say something to you that's going to sound really stupid, but I need you to go in the office. Because my boss just said, I got to see a butt in a seat. And so, that again is where it's just this distrust that comes in there. And we're going to talk more about that later. So not only do we speak it, but we think it, and it's in every action that we take is in full support of this. So one way we do that is focusing on outcomes and giving teams autonomy. The way we did this is, we were very much a Kanban shop, and this is not only Ackland, but this is also when I was at Linkit. And we would sit down with our clients and say, all right, what is your big idea? What are you trying to do? And we would get our team together, and then it was all about delivering that value to the client to make them money for whatever it is. If it's going to increase revenue, protect revenue, avoid costs, or decrease costs. If it doesn't do one of those four things, why are you doing it? Doesn't make dollars, doesn't make sense. So we would do activities with our clients to make sure our team was fully invested in the purpose of what they were doing. Why are you doing this? How does it make money for you? And then my team could be really good at building the right thing as fast as possible to get that value to that client. So I collected all these metrics. We had Trello, and we sucked in all the information about it and had our own metrics dashboard and things like that. But the only ones I really cared about was team satisfaction and client satisfaction. That's the only ones that I showed to executives. They could see all the rest of them, but the main ones I reported to them is, this is how happy our clients are. This is how happy our teams are. If anybody wanted to see those other metrics, they could, but those metrics were more for the team, for self-improvement. And the good thing is that I worked at places that were okay with that. Every now and then you would get one stray person who says, ooh, I want to see actual estimates versus the original estimates and things like that, actual hours worked. And I was always dissuade that, because I'm like, why do you want to see that? If your clients are happy and your teams are happy and you fully believe and trust that they are doing the best work they can be doing, we should be happy. If we're doing this and it's making us money and we're maximizing value and learning, we should be happy with that. So get your teams to focus on the outcomes. And it was easy for us because I have clients. When you're internal, sometimes a little iffy of whether something was successful or not. Sometimes companies don't really know. I mean, when a company is paying you X number of dollars a week for something, they are very critical about whether it gets, it's meeting their needs or not. And we would have clients who over time, who were kind of distrustful at first. They would really pay attention to all these metrics and they get, why does this mean? What does this mean? But at the end, they'd go, listen, your team is delivering. And just, if your team's happy, I'm happy, because I'm getting the outcomes I need. When you are delivering value, a lot of the stuff that's, the worries go away. There's just that inherent trust. So when we make our clients and our stakeholder success, our team success, that was a really great way to alleviate a lot of that. And as I said, when we do our discovery process, the first thing we kick off with them is we did a product vision workshop with them. We would do user and persona workshops with them, really understand the why and the who before we ever talked about the what and the how. And that drove a lot of what we built. Oh, you're a startup and you're trying to get enough functionality to get some seed money. Okay, what do you need to show them? Let's build that. Oh, you need to go to a conference because you're going to show this and you're trying to get some new customers or some new integration partners. What do you need to show that? Let me be a partner with you and to make you successful. So we weren't just order takers. We were partnered with their success. Also, an interesting side product of this is also we charge by the week, time and materials. You pay a flat fee for the whole team by the week. And since it's time and materials, you might come and say, hey, what does it look like to build this? And we did have an estimation process that was a ranged estimate that did as good as we could at that time, but it's still time and materials. So they're like, oh, wait a minute. So I'm going to pay you all this money every week and you have no guarantee that you're going to meet this timeline. I'm like, no, because it's, it's as best as we can guess. And we know things are going to change. But what we did is we gave them a 30-day out. Listen, even if you sign a year SOW with you, if in 30 days, or at any time you don't think you're getting what you need, you 30-day out. And we never had that executed except for twice. Once was we got done early. So the client just, I don't need you for the rest of the time. We executed out. And the other one was we had a client who was just a little too early in their process. They brought in us a little too early and they couldn't feed us enough information to keep the team going. And so we just ended early because I'm like, listen, I don't think we're giving you the value. And they still recommended us to other people. But we never had anybody take that out because the team was constantly working towards giving them value. And as long as you're consistently delivering value to them that they can then take and show the stakeholders, to shareholders, to partners or internal people, or actually to customers, and even be getting that value early, that soothes a lot of things in the background. Next is do get together when it makes sense. As I said, there are some teams that I worked with that I never met, but we tried. Even at Ackland or at Linkit, we would do it every 6 weeks. We'd bring everybody into the office every 6 weeks, and we did what we called suite planning, 6 weeks execution and evaluation periods. And I learned from those because those were really focused on, it was almost like PI planning. I don't want to say PI planning because we weren't safe, but it looked a lot like that. And it was really focused on that. And I found that it was great to do for that, but it was a wasted opportunity in that we didn't do a lot of team building when we were there. So when I was at Ackland, we would get team together. We try to do it twice a year. We'd have what we call Camp Ackland. We'd have a spring one and a fall one. We would all go down to Honduras because most of our people were in Honduras, and it was easier for us to go to Honduras. And Honduras is only about as big as Tennessee, if you know how big Tennessee is. There's 4 hours between the two major cities. We'd find someplace in between, bus everybody there. We'd fly into there, and we didn't try to make it about work. It wasn't a planning. Is that a question? It wasn't about planning. There would maybe be some training here and there, but that was like, less of it. It was, this is your team. I want you to know your team. Lots of team, team building stuff, and not the team building that's supposed to teach you a lesson. Some of it was just fun. Yeah, we had some of that. So it was a good balance of those things. And it would be, like you would see everybody be so excited to finally put, faces and to names and be together. And everybody would be so excited. Like you would just see this big, vibrancy after that would happen. And the good thing about doing it twice a year is about the time when that started fading, we were planning for the next one and everybody got excited about the next one. So I do think you try to get together when it makes sense. I think that we often try to get people together, for business reasons. And I'm not saying don't do that, but the thing, if you sit there and talk to your people about what they miss the most when they're not in the office, they don't go, gee, I miss PI planning. Gee, I miss, refinement or the stand-ups. No, they say, I just miss people. That's the biggest thing. The biggest thing we've heard from being remote is being depressed by not being social and being around people. So we really tried to make the actual first thing we thought about of why we got people together to be about team building and give some of that back. Now, then when it makes sense, do something that makes sense for the business. So at Ackland, it would make most sense was engagement kickoffs. When I first start with a client and they don't know us and we don't know them, that was the best time to bring people up from Honduras, come to the client's offices. Every now and then we had somebody who would say, can I go to Honduras? We're like, okay, we go to Honduras. And they'd come down there. But we would get everybody together for the big kickoff week. And that's when we did, like I said, the product visioning and the story stuff. We did a lot of team building while they were there. We were big fans of, especially when you're remote and especially when you're offshore, or we were near shore because Latin America. Too often, you may not even know everybody's name. Or sometimes they don't even want you to. Like you talk to one person and they talk to everybody else. We're like, no, this is your team. I want to treat it like it is your team that's within your company. You're in a Slack channel with everybody. You can talk to anybody anytime you want to. I want you to know their names. I want you to know what's going on with them today and tomorrow. It just made us tighter as a team. So engagement kickoffs was one of the biggest ones for us, but it might be something different for you. It might be planning. It might be groomings, and it depends also on the cost. So we used to get people together a lot more often when we were smaller and it cost less. And the more and more bigger we got and the harder it was to get everyone together, we had to be a little bit more choosy of when we would do that. When I have teams that are, semi close together, maybe regionally remote or even in the same city, but remote sometimes, I would have them say, make a list of all the meetings that you have and just, have to do a dot voting on which is the one that is the best to be in person. Rather than saying arbitrarily, we're going to be here on Mondays and Tuesdays. Well, no, let's be here for these events because these are the ones that we need the richness of that. And also we left that up to the teams. There's obviously some things where everybody had to come together for things, but once that was kind of established and teams were kind of on their own, I didn't want to make this team have the same cadence of this. Like sometimes I would be at companies that would just unanimously say, everybody comes in on Tuesdays. And that would just be ridiculous because that's not everybody had the same meetings on that day or things like that. It was just arbitrary. So trying to, get together when it makes sense for the richness of being together and let it be more about, you've probably heard the idea of your first team. So my first team is the team, usually my delivery team. And then my second team might be, if I'm a developer, all my other developers in my development department or my guild or whatever I'm in. But my first team are the people that I'm responsible for every day today to help them deliver. And so I would always try to say, whatever your first team is, try to make the richness for those connections as much as possible. And then trust. I mean, that's just the biggest part of why you see these things break down is there's a lack of trust. And it is easy to do. When I worked at LeanKit was, very agile, born of agile, like 4 people who loved lean so much, they were like, let's build a product just based on lean. And they're like, we're never going to be like our corporate overlords again. And so they had a very liberal work from home whenever you want to policy. But one of our teams there, they had the unfortunate that their team room was right next to where the CEO was. And he had to walk through their team room to get to his office every time. We were in a weird building. And that team, he observed for a couple of weeks, was never all together at any given time, because some people are like, I want to work on Mondays and Tuesdays. And some people are like, I want to work on Wednesdays and Fridays. And some people are like, I want to work on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So there was never time when all their team together. It was arbitrary when they were in there. And when he saw that, he was like, yeah, I can't believe you're doing this. Everybody has to be in the office. You know, now it didn't last long. That lasted about a month, and there was such a big rebellion. He's like, all right, I rethink it. But that's when we came up with that policy of, all right, be together when it makes sense. Those just arbitrarily choose days. You can't just say, all right, I'm only going to come in Fridays when the rest of your team is not coming in on Fridays. You know, find some way to make that rich. But it has to be that trust to give that teams the support and trust they're getting things done. And this is the feedback that I've always gotten back for the teams that we did it well with, no matter where I was at. This one happens to come from one of our QA people. He eventually became a scrum master at Ackland, he just said, when I asked him when I was building this project or this presentation for some feedback, give me some thoughts. What do you not like? What do you like? And the number one thing that came back of what they liked was the trust that was extended to them. And that allowed them to really feel free to do what they need to do because they were trusted. Because again, I'm like, I don't care how you're doing your work today. You know what we need to get done. You're invested in the client as much as we are to get this value out. And again, I want to restate that I still haven't said anything about tactics. We've said nothing about tools or anything like that. This is all about the culture surrounding it, because while all those tactics are great, and I'm going to have a Q&A later, and if you want to talk about tactics, I'd be happy to talk about tactics, but I've just seen that not matter a hill of beans if the culture around it isn't supportive of it. It doesn't matter how great your tools are, doesn't matter how many people got the camera on, doesn't matter how great all your stuff is, how many times you have a virtual happy hour. If the culture's not there around it as a company, it's always going to be a second-class citizen. It's always going to suffer and limp along. And the sad part is it's the self-fulfilling prophecy, is that then you won't have as much of the benefits as you think you should get. And then it gives you, again, if you didn't have that trust in the beginning, it gives you even more to say, see, it's not working. So we shouldn't do it. It's kind of like when you adopt Agile or Scrum, and it exposes all your problems and you go, see all these problems? That's why Scrum doesn't work. We're like, well, no, Scrum did exactly what it's supposed to do. It showed you all your problems. You still have to fix them. Scrum doesn't do anything except show you how screwed you are faster. That's what its job is. And so you'll see the same thing. People will start looking, they're already looking for the inefficiencies in remote work. And the second they see it, they'll revert back. That's the culture part that really has to be there to support this. So I want to stop here because I've been going on for a long time. I want to ask what you guys are struggling with, just any general questions, but I kind of want to hear about what you're struggling with right now. Everybody's doing it perfectly.
I threw a question in chat. When
Okay.
you talked about your different teams, it sounded like maybe you had, I'll just pick Honduras because you mentioned that. You had several teams in Honduras that maybe all the members of the teams co-located, but the teams were distributed from each other team. Am I making sense? Let's say three different cities, three different teams, but the team members in each city were co-located. Is that how it works?
No, not even that. So we had co-working spaces in case you just had to get together, but that was very rare. Everybody worked from home, and the teams were all distributed. So they have two big cities, San Pedro Sula and Tegucigalpa, and you may have some team members here and some team members there. And like, even when you try to get together with like your second team, which would be like, if I'm a QA, like I want all the QA to get together. Some were here and some were there. So there was no central located spot where everybody, either your first team, like your delivery team, or your second team, which is more your department, were co-located. Very, very rarely. Every now and then it might luckily just happen out that way. But also the more and more we expanded, we had people in Mexico. We had people in all of South America, and so it got to the point where there was no easy central location for them anymore at that point in time.
Thanks.
All right. So Lisa put one in there. We have teams that cover 3 to 4 time zones, USA, offshore in India. It's a very small window of overlap, schedule event to meet. So I will say this, we specifically stuck with Latin America because of that problem. Even just when I worked in Nashville and my home office was in San Francisco, and also they were lazy in San Francisco. They came in around 9. So, that was already, a couple hours taken out, and you couldn't schedule over anybody's lunches. So that's a couple hours taken out. And then, you couldn't schedule over when we left. And so even though there was only 2 hours difference between us, you only got like 2 or 3 hours max collaboration time. So what we do in cases every now and then, like we had a team who had to do like Android and another team had to do Roku. We couldn't find anybody in Latin America who could do that. At least, that was available for us. So we had to get some people. We had some people in Nigeria and we had some people in Pakistan. And when we brought those people on, we just had to say part of it is, listen, you work our hours. One of the things we sell as part of this is all of our clients, most of our clients were in Nashville, but we still have clients in Washington, D.C. We had some that were in Texas and some that were, I think, a couple in California and one oddball in Hawaii. And we just said, listen, it's central time zone plus or minus 2, and even if you're not located in that, that's what you work. And some people could do it and some people couldn't. I had a guy who worked from Spain. And I didn't even know he worked in Spain until about 3 months in when I tried to fly him in for something. I said, oh yeah, Fernando, let's fly you in. And he goes, I can't, I'm in Spain. I've only been here X number of months and I can't fly out because I'm trying to get residency in my visa. And I'm like, you are? And he's like, yeah, but he worked our hours. He never complained. He never asked. He got his work done. Again, I only cared about his outcomes and I didn't even know he worked. So he became my poster child for somebody said, can I move to, wherever? One guy said he was going to move to Singapore. And I was like, as long as you can be a Fernando, absolutely. But if you can't, we were not one of those. Some people love 24-hour coding cycles. Like they love having India and China because they can code up until the last second and then you hand it off and they code up in the last second and you hand it off. I personally cannot stand it. I think you get a lot of code done. I don't think you get a lot of value done. And I think it's like, if you ever see me type, people think I type very fast, but 70% of what I'm hitting is the delete key. So it's a lot of capacity. It looks like a lot of work going on, but not a lot of value being done. So we made a point not to do that. So the few times we did have to pull in somebody from a drastically different time zone, it was part of coming on board of, listen, those are hours our work. And I would kind of have like, this is what I'm expecting. You need to be available. The teams would also work on their what we call maximum collaboration hours. So when we worked with a client in Hawaii, everybody kind of got up a little early and worked a little, and got off a little bit earlier. They decided to move their collaboration hours a little bit up to fit that client. I let the teams kind of decide that. When teams work with Eastern time zones, they might shift a little bit. Plus Honduras doesn't do daylight savings time. So for for half the year, they were the same time zone as I was in central time zone. And then half they were an hour behind. And again, it didn't matter as long as the first team, which is the delivery team to the client, found this is our time. This is when we're going to maximize the time to be available to each other for collaboration purposes. And we agree to that. So that's how we handle it. So, you may not have that. And then that gets into a whole nother question of handing handoffs. A quick thing towards that. The best way I saw that is I was working with FIS and they were in Milwaukee and they had an India team. And the way they would split is the developer would, at the end of the day, he made a little 5-minute video to the guy he was handing it off to. And he would share a screen sometimes or just talk sometimes rather than just an email or a couple of comments and a check-in or something like that. It was as close to face-to-face as they would get. They actually didn't get face-to-face, but it would be a video he would send to them. And then they would work on that. And then they would send a video to him the next day, kind of explaining what they did and stuff like that. I thought that was, very creative. And I saw them get a lot of value out of that. The team worked pretty well. I don't know if I answered the question.
Yeah.
Okay. Tendency to multitask pulls all of us. Can you tell folks how you ask you to repeat your question? How did you handle that? Oh, is this like when you're on there and somebody says, Tommy, what do you think about that? And they go, can you repeat the question? Because I totally wasn't listening. So another thing we did at Ackland is when you got onboarded, there was an hour-long thing about being a good remote worker. And it was all the tactics. It was like, keep your camera on, have a good headset. I like wired headsets because every now and then, at least once a day, somebody says, oh, my Bluetooth is acting up or my power went out, So we had all of that. But another thing was kind of just etiquette in general. And we had a whole course on active listening about how to stay it. And man, believe me, this is the physician not healing himself, because I will be in meetings. I would get in these management meetings. We call them L10s. And I'd be in like 3 of them in a day where we're repeating the same thing we had in the last meeting. And I'm like, I could totally get this email. I could totally do this. And I had to really stop myself from doing that because it was such a temptation. Because every now and then I would be asked a question. Now I'm really good at bullshitting. I can answer your question without even knowing what your question is based on context. But that's not the best way to do it. But I think active listening is a big thing. That's why do we have cameras on? To kind of help with that. But also I'm really good. Like you can see, I'm kind of looking this way. It's because I have a really big monitor. I have one of those big ultra wides and I'm looking off here. I've learned with all my teams where their camera usually is. So I could tell, like when they do this, yeah, he ain't looking at me. He's looking at something else. We have a bunch of rules about limiting back channeling and stuff like that, because somebody be talking and you're having a side conversation on Slack. You can only do so much, to be honest, but setting up the expectation of what's there. The other thing is that in my meetings, and of course this is not one because I'm doing a presentation, of limiting how much I talk. Like I know I could talk a lot and I'll even feel it myself. Like I'm getting out of breath. I've been talking for a while. I would try to, we had some things with that listening was about limiting how much you speak and stopping and asking, and not asking a question that silence is an acceptable answer. Like any questions? Well, silence is an acceptable answer. And you could have been not listening. And I say, any questions? You go, I don't have any questions about listening. It would be, a little bit more of a pointed question. All right. I just talked about this, and this. Can everybody do a quick, thumbs up, thumbs down on this decision point I just made, and if you do that enough, people kind of become more active because they're like, all right, I know he's going to ask one of those stupid voting questions. And it's going to be specific and I can't get out of it. So there are techniques for that. Again, just think about in a real meeting, how many side conversations you have, or people who are dozing or staring off in space. There's only so much I can get back. It just gets worse because of being remote. But that's what we've done. And then if I noticed it, there were definitely times where I had a product owner and I noticed he said that a lot. And so I was his team lead, and I just had a one-on-one with him. I said, hey man, it seems like, pretty frequently, at least once a meeting, you're asked a question and you have to ask to repeat it. What's going on? And he was working at a co-working space, and he said it was just a little chaotic, stuff like that. And I'm like, all right, what can I do to get you in a space where you need to be? Do we need to buy you a better headset? Do we need to do this? What do we need to do? But I can't, you, especially as the product owner, when we're in a product backlog refinements, I can't have you asking that. You're the point person who needs to be most on. So if you see that, it is something that we would actually just handle if I saw it kind of egregiously on a one-on-one as well. All right. Oops, I can't see that. There we go. My teams haven't liked follow the sun headups. All right. I don't like them either. What have you found with them? Let me ask this. Has anybody else found, when you're trying to do that follow the sun or 24-hour coding cycle kind of approach, again, I don't like it. Is anybody feeling like you're being somewhat successful at it?
I think
mostly shaking heads.
I think Larry, you can back me up on this, but I think we found that we'd hand off to offshore, they'd code stuff, then we'll come back onshore, and then we'd spend half the day fixing defects.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Sheila, you raised your hand.
Yeah. I worked with a team that was offshore in India. We had a few teams there. They weren't even all co-located in India, but they were IBM India mostly. And we had one onshore person who worked with us directly and worked with them. And we did have a stand-up where there was an overlap. So I felt it was pretty successful. We had an aggressive schedule and we made it.
Is it something you think was sustainable? Could you have done that for 5 years?
Yes, because the
Okay.
group that I was working with in that organization had been doing that for about 7 years, I think.
Okay. What type of work was it?
The particular project, it was with Marriott. It was a system. Well, the system I was responsible for was one that was downstream from some newer stuff, but there was everything from really old mainframe to really new stuff.
So support or modernization type stuff?
It was a little of both. There was
Okay.
some modernization going on and there was some just support because of pieces being upgraded or pieces becoming obsolete and having to be replaced or, reworked. But a lot of it was new functionality too, because we had to go through scenarios for some pretty complex business situations and that involved multiple systems. So I think it worked just fine. I mean, that's one that I can point to where I think it was very successful because we had a continuity within the offshore team. That's the time when I think I've had problems with the offshore teams, is when you don't have real continuity. I had another one that was kind of disastrous because we were doing great. And then the offshore team got almost completely replaced with people that had no clue what we were doing. And they undid half the stuff that was working.
And I think you can be definitely, so we're kind of getting into, offshore and distributed could be two different things that I say, but so I've worked at like Deloitte. Deloitte was a big one. They had their own offshore, R10, I think is what it was called. And it was the hammer for every nail you had. And so I was on a team where we had about 12 people over there doing SQL work because we're doing a big SQL, SAP to SQL conversion. And it was Steve was exactly like you're saying. Listen, they did 8 hours worth of work, but I had to do 6 hours worth of work to undo their 8 hours worth of work. And at first we complained about it and they sent someone from Indy to come and sit with our team. And he was just the one. So then they would do the work. He would do about 3 hours rework for them. And then I do about 3 hours of rework with him. And I begged them, I said, listen, if you just gave me 2 mid-level SQL developers in this room, because the rest of us were all in a room together. Like they were big on war rooms at Deloitte. They threw us all in a room. There were like 20 of us in this huge room. It's like, just give me 2 guys. I would be so much more productive than this. And it was like, no, this is our solution. It's our cost saving solution. I'm like, but it's not, now this, and I think that works, Sheila, to your example, there's some works that are better than others. Not saying that you can't do any one, collaborative product development where you're constantly working with the client and you're doing a lot of just-in-time requirements gathering and the client's allowed to kind of, in development work with you. That might be a little harder because the client's not available when it's happening. If the work is, could be pretty cut out and cut and dry and kind of be handed over, and there's not as many questions, I think you can be very successful with it. I mean, I've been on projects where we were successful, and that we met the needs eventually and those things. And again, in hindsight, would I have said if I'd had all those people in the same room, could we have been faster or made a better product? I'd like to say that, but I don't know that. So I think, not saying that you can't do those things. I will tell you this, I'm not going to go back to a place where I'm doing those things again. That's,
Well,
I would prefer not to.
I was with one of the big 4 last year where we were working with teams all over the world, but the teams that were on other continents in other time zones, where there really wasn't a lot of time overlap unless we asked them to work when it was the middle of the night there. We were giving them pretty distinct pieces to work on. So they were responsible for a specific feature or a specific set of stories or something, because we were doing scaled Agile in that particular environment. And it was working just fine. I mean, everybody knew the approximate size of what they were working on. Obviously, there were changes. There was a point where you say, well, if you want to change it now, that's a new story for a future release. That's not going in this one. I mean, you just have to set your parameters.
Right. And I think you bring up a really good point, Sheila. A lot of places I've been, offshoring or remote or whatever that type of work is kind of, we do that for everything instead of being wise about, all right, this type of work probably will work really well for that. And this type of work may not be. That's what I was saying at Deloitte is Deloitte just said, listen, we do this. This is our cost saving thing that we apply to every project we do kind of blindly. And it's kind of like just applying any process blindly on top of anything without really kind of being smart about it is dangerous. You can be successful at it, but then there's a lot of chances where it'll be a mismatch.
Well, I was working with onshore teams too that were distributed where in theory they were working out of 1 or 2 offices. In reality, some of them were like 6-7 hours from the office they were theoretically working from, and they never went to that office, or they went to it once a quarter for a day just to show their face.
Yeah.
But it worked fine because we had stand-ups.
Yeah. Well, and I will say this, when I was at LeanKit, we had a team that was entirely remote. And then we hired one guy in Nashville. And so the office was here in Nashville. And he's like, he even just said, listen, I'm never coming to the office. Just treat me like a remote worker. Because at LeanKit, we had co-located teams. We had completely remote teams. We had a couple of hybrid teams. And those hybrid teams sucked. It's just, that is the worst. Like, listen, do one or the other. Because what would happen is we had one team, the worst one was they had 7 members that were co-located in one room, and one poor guy in Utah. And so they had a TV screen, he'd be put up on there. But of course, we're talking to him, but then the guy next to me starts talking, I'm talking to him, and it's getting picked up or it's not being picked up or whatever's happening. And so one of the Agile coaches said, all right, you need to treat everybody like you're remote if you have one person remote. So then maybe Steve and I are sitting next to each other, but I can't turn and say anything to you, Steve. I have to go, Steve, can you do this? And you would reply. And it was just, it felt so stupid. And they were the worst performing team we had. The best performing team we had, and I'm using a couple of different metrics for that, was the co-located one. They were the mobile team. They were a team, like, they didn't have stand-ups and they didn't need to, because they were talking every day. They were doing that. They were constantly communicating. They were just very high performing. They were a very tightly bound team. They did a lot of things together, but our remote team was very good too. The remote team maybe didn't do as much of that, but it was also the team that had like the highest skilled people. We had gotten the senior developers from everywhere. And they would do things like they would just be on a call like this. They just have one up while they were working. They were constant communication. So they did a lot of things, but that hybrid team, because we had about 3 of them, they were the ones who always struggled. They were always kind of, fumbling with the best way to make that work. I think Larry's got one in here I want to address. So I touched on a topic of somebody who's not pulling their weight. Can we expand that more on that, please? So this is outside of it, but let's talk about it. That is the thing, that is the dread, is because I can't see you. How do I know you're doing the most you can do? The first part of that is hiring the right people. It is part of just, I make sure that we really look for people who've been successful in remote places before, that are high performers, that are highly communicative. And I set up those expectations. Like my teams, I would say, communicate. If you think you've communicated too much, communicate one more time. And we had a lot of kind of etiquette about being responsive and stuff like that. And so what we would see is when people start being responsive, when I start seeing in Slack, where's Joe, a couple of times a day, it would be a thing of where I would, if I was their scrum master or their agile coach or their lead, whatever position I was in, I would usually kind of have a one-on-one with them. Hey, what's going on? I see people asking where you are a lot of times, and we're supposed to be available, during these collaboration hours within a certain amount of time. And what's going on? And sometimes, there was something going on that I'm like, all right, what can I do to fix that? Something going on with your life, going that. If you need time, let's take time off. Let's do this. And sometimes I was fed a line of BS that I'm like, and it would be a thing of just, we were never going to be a place that got down to like, I'm not going to put anything on your computer to see what you're doing. I'm not going to track time. I'm not going to even log in and log out. If I have to do that, then you shouldn't have been here in the first place, or we made a wrong hire. But if I saw those kind of indicators of that, and the biggest one was always you not being able to find somebody, because we did a lot of pairing. And as far as your quality of your work, that was really easy to see because of the pairing. Like you couldn't hide bad quality work. It was, our work was so visible, and we paired on things. Devs and QA paired a lot. Our QA was very technical, and so they would do a lot of be in the dev code. But the biggest one would be not being available. So one of the things we had as our etiquette training is, I'm like, listen, treat it as if you're in a room. If we were all in a room together and we were working together and you're depending on me for stuff throughout the day, and I just got up and walked out and you didn't see me for 5 hours, you'd fire me. That would not be acceptable. So we had team channels, and it was always kind of a thing is like, hey, if you just got to step out, just let your team know. And also like, cause a lot, especially when we were working with the people in Honduras, like if you said, hey, I got to go down to the bank, going to the bank in Honduras is not a 30-minute trip. It is the whole rigmarole. It's a couple hours. Like, a lot of things in a third world country take a lot longer than they need to do. So one, we were very good about, giving people the space because we knew that happened. And just like, let us know, hey, I got to go to this thing. I'm probably going to be AFK. This is where I'm at. Be very clear about, I'm going to step away. These are things that either I have kind of hanging over me or I'm doing, or things that I'm waiting on, and if you did that, then the team was really good about, if something happened and you were still away, we could usually swarm around it and get something done. That didn't happen a lot. And so we also had a time off channel that if there was something that was going to be more than just stepping away from your computer for a little bit of time, you would go and kind of put in the time off channel. Listen, something's come up. I got to be out the rest of the day. If power went out or internet went down, which in a third world country happens a lot, it was just something, just let us know. And the other thing is we were very tolerant of it. We would have clients who sometimes, like when we would onboard clients, we would say, listen, part of the charm of what you're getting with this cheaper rate is some of this logistical stuff that goes on. All of our teams, every time we brought somebody on, you had to have 2 backups if your power or your internet went out. If my power goes out or my internet goes out, I go to this place. If that's not good enough, I go to this place, because sometimes like whole city blocks would lose it. And they had to be, I had 30-minute, in 30 minutes I can relocate, I relocate. So the teams a lot of times would come and say, power's out, relocating. But I had to sometimes train clients to say, because clients would come in and say, this guy said he was going to the bank and he was gone for 4 hours. We're like, yeah, that's what it takes. But did you get the stuff that, and also I have metrics out the wazoo to prove, hey, did our our cycle time go down? Did our throughput go down? No. Why? Because my team's really good about swarming around it. But if, I saw people asking people about it or getting on to people about it, you would see the number of times people told you about it go down. So that's a big thing, is that how you react to that kind of stuff and embrace it. If you embrace it and say, listen, things happen. If I see it excessively, then I might do a one-on-one with them, say, hey, what's going on? Is there something happening? And that would happen. Like we had a guy who was being excessively gone all the time. And I found out his mother was staying with him and she was very sick and he was having to take care of her. And he didn't want to burden anyone down. Like, okay, you don't have to, it's not a burden to us to let you know that's going through it. Let's let the team know, and the team will help and swarm and support you, and we'll support you. What we need to do as a group. But anything to encourage the trust and the transparency is what we had, is allowed it to make it to where it was galactically obvious when somebody was having a problem. That was a really long answer. I apologize, but that
was great. That was really good. I appreciate that.
Do we have time for maybe one more question, Tommy?
All right. I think we got one here from Rachel. I think maybe it's a statement. I like sprint planning, estimating stories, validating capacity, stimulating. Okay, that's more of a statement. I agree, Rachel. We have one more question.
Anyone else?
I will try to make it quick, but I have no promises with where my thought process went with everything you just said. So kind of what you were talking about just now about someone not pulling their weight. I have some situations or current situation where it's a little bit more, he's early in career, he's a little not confident in himself. And I've really been trying to coach the team, kind of hold him accountable, or not hold him accountable, but help him say, like, you can take it on, be a little more encouraging, and trying to have those conversations and helping him along, right? So that's just like one thing. But I think what it takes me into in the biggest struggle having teams that are, I understand your point with hybrid because both the teams are hybrid and it makes it tough. When they're in the office, I'll get them on camera, but they're very distracted. When they're home, they're not on camera and I don't know what, like it's hard to know what they're doing. So really where my question comes down to, what are some things that have worked? Not so much for ceremonies. I blocked off afternoons for like 3 afternoons a week for sworn time. I try to encourage them to use the Teams chat, including the one that myself and the PO is in, to say, just because it's technical and we're on it doesn't mean you can't use it. But it, one, stops us from trying to like, hey, where are you? Are you finishing that? Right? It doesn't ask that question. And 2, it's like, are you jumping on a call? Is it something the product owner can jump on? Is it something me as a scrum master can jump on? Are you spinning your wheels? Are you asking your team for help soon enough? Are we pulling in architecture, whoever, soon enough? And I try to encourage it, kind of simulating what you would get if we were like in the office, all face to face. And I've struggled. They've asked for it, they have it, they don't really utilize it. So I guess I'm just asking kind of, is there anything that you've done with the teams that have helped in that kind of situation?
A lot of the same things you said. So we have a team channel. It's very much encouraged to, to use that to communicate. We pair a lot. So, the good thing with pairing is sometimes, and we do what we call, I hate this term, promiscuous pairing. It's a horrible term, but it means doing it when it makes the most sense. There's got to be a better term. But, so a lot of times, especially with junior people, because we hired a lot of people straight out of university, most of our teams would have a senior, either 2 seniors or a senior and really high mid. And then we usually have some junior person we'd bringing in. They are always paired, for a lot of that. And even if it's, let's you and me pair in the morning, you feel good about this? Okay, I'm going to let you go for a couple hours. We're going to check in back on you. So there was a mentoring and a pairing, just culture that helped a lot with that. Also, very much like anytime somebody came to me with an individual problem, and they wanted me to solve it. I'm like, why couldn't you solve it? I would push on the team of help each other out, before you bring me in, be self-sufficient and have them a little bit more accountable for each other. And that's a culture thing. And there's lots of different ways to do that. The other thing is that, we didn't have to do this as much, but with new teams, I'll do it is especially like if you're doing Scrum and you're in the sprint backlog and you have the task and you break down the task, we always know to make the task smaller than a day so that, if the next day you're still working on it, that is a point in time to ask the questions you're asking. Are you stuck? Are you this, that, and the other? At Ackland, I didn't have to do that as much because of the pairing, because, everybody was touching. The daily stand-up was not the only time we were talking to each other. And there was, moments of time of checking in and stuff like that. And not just with the developers, even, devs and QA and everybody kind of was always kind of communicating to that. And I found that did a couple of things is to Larry's question, it made it easy to spot when somebody wasn't pulling their weight. It also made it easy for people to ask for help. And it was a thing where like when somebody would ask for help, it's like the whole Japanese thing of pulling the cord, pulling the andon cord and stopping the line. In America, we see stopping the line as a bad thing. Everything goes to a halt. And in Japan, they're like, that was great because that was an opportunity. If I see those go down, we have less opportunities to get better. And we adopted the same thing, stopping and asking for help. I want more of that. Especially if you're a junior person and you haven't asked for help in a couple of days, what's going on? I want you doing that, even if it's just a double check or stuff like that, and just for the whole team. So that's part of that communicate part. So, that's not a definitive answer. That's more of a culture thing. But the things you already mentioned about channels, small tasks. Also, if you ever saw our Trello board, it's like 30 something lanes long. It is a very in-depth, Kanban board. I know where anything is at any given second, what branch it's in, whether it's waiting to work, where it's being worked on, who generally should be working on it. And we really use that as a big driving point for our daily stand-ups. Like, we worked from right to left. Where are we to get value done today? What is it we're going to do to get value done today? Who's got what? All right, let's go. just the peer pressure that put on people of knowing that, all right, we just talked about it and I know what I'm supposed to be doing. The next day it made it really hard to come in and say, I got caught up. So that was another thing that made it easier for us too, is to make it galactically transparent where everything was.
Nice.
All right. Are
Yeah.
we ready to wrap up?
I think we're ready to wrap up. So
right.
if you would all please do me a quick favor, go down to your reactions and let's offer a virtual hand clap for Tommy and thank him for joining us tonight. So Tommy, we really appreciated you taking the time. Great information, some great stuff to share. We really appreciate you joining us, and hopefully we can all implement some aspects of this in our own companies, because we're all dealing with cultural challenges and trying to peel us back into the office as well. So awesome stuff. Thank you again. Thank you everyone for joining us. We hope to see you again in March, and we'll see you later.
Thank you so much.
Tommy,
Steve,
thank you
I'll-
so much.
Thank you guys. There's my contact